Rachelle Waterman is a 30-something-year-old blogger from Alaska, and she lives a very normal life these days, but her past is a whole different story. At the age of 16, Rachelle was part of a murderous masterplan to get rid of her own mother. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be discussing the case of Rachelle Waterman. Quickly, before we get into the case, I do just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, NordVPN. If you go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is also down below in the description if you just want to click it. There you will find an exclusive deal waiting for you, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. You guys already know how much of a big fan I am of NordVPN. I have been using a VPN for years and years and years now, mainly just to get more out of the internet. With a VPN, you unlock so much more content, so many different websites, content that is restricted or blocked in your country. Basically, all you have to do is open the NordVPN app, and with one click, pick a country, and they'll make it appear as though you're using the internet as though you're there instead of where you are. And this comes with so many benefits. The main one for me has always been internet safety. This helps to hide your IP address, makes it seem as though you're operating from a different one so that your IP address is not like trackable and hackable. Of course, internet safety is the most important thing here, but I would be lying if I didn't say my main use of NordVPN is to get better streaming service selections. Because obviously all the different countries have different streaming service catalogs. Like Netflix in the UK is completely different to Netflix in the USA. So I'm always VPNing over there because they've got a better selection. I think we've got the better Disney Plus selection over here in the UK. Last time I checked, we did, but America's always had better Netflix, and I've always used a VPN to get over there. And last time I talked about NordVPN, I told you about their new threat protection feature, which I'm still obsessed with. This takes NordVPN up a level completely, makes it a whole cybersecurity tool. Basically, it blocks intrusive ads, it checks all the things that you download for potential malware. It's just got so many protective features in it. Have a look, it's amazing. I don't want to live without it now. There's so many reasons to love NordVPN, and like I said, if you go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is also down below in the description, there'll be an exclusive deal waiting there for you, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Just a couple of content warnings before we get into this case. Today we're going to be discussing themes of mental and physical child abuse, and there's going to be a lot of themes of large age gap relationships between an adult and a child. So if any of that is something that you don't want to hear about right now, I completely understand. Click out of the video now. Hopefully I'll get to see you at some point in the future with a different video, but look after yourself. And all that being said, let's get into the case. So like I said, today's case takes place in Alaska. Well, just off the coast of Alaska, there's a bunch of islands. And today we're going to Prince of Wales Island, and the biggest town on that island is called Craig. It's just a bloke's name, isn't it? It's just a bloke's name. But Craig is the biggest town on this island, but it's still a super small town. This is a tiny island altogether, that the biggest town is still tiny. Not much really goes on in Craig or on Prince of Wales Island altogether. It's one of those really small communities that's always talked about in true crime videos where everyone knows each other and everyone's in each other's business. But it really was. Even more so in this case, actually, because they literally lived on an island. They were in the sea together. The only way to get to the mainland of Alaska is through boat. I think they've got a plane that they can take as well, a short little plane. To be fair, for that reason, it was a really safe place to live because there weren't strangers coming in and out. There was no visitors really. You kind of needed a reason to go to Craig or to go to Prince of Wales Island, otherwise you wouldn't bother getting the boat there, you know. But yeah, like I said, not much goes on there. There's not that many people there, and a lot of the kids that lived there didn't love it because it was quite cramping. There's nowhere for them to explore and to go out and be independent and free. it's a nice place for the adults, but the kids feel very cramped there. But that being said, it's a really, really safe area, so a lot of families do try and raise their kids there. Like, the crime rates are super, super low there because everyone just kind of respects each other because they all know each other. People aren't going to go out and, like, commit crimes against each other, you know? I mean, obviously they did, but not to a degree of, like, your average city. Craig was home to the Waterman family, which consisted of father, Carl, aka Doc, he's better known as Doc, the mother, Laurie, and their 16-year-old daughter, Rachelle. Rachelle wasn't an only child. She did have an older brother named Jeff, but he was away at university at the time of this case, and he really doesn't come into play, like, at all throughout the video. So for the sake of this case, the Waterman family was just 3 people, but she did have an older brother. So yeah, it's Laurie, Doc, and Rachelle, and they had lived in Craig, well, all of Rachelle's life, so at least 16 years. They'd been there a long, long time, and her parents loved it. But Rachelle, like I said, like all the other kids, she felt really cramped there. So obviously Rachelle is a student at the high school. I think there's only like 1 high school there, maybe 2, because there's not that many kids. Rachelle was a student, her dad was an estate agent, and Laurie was a special educational needs teaching assistant. The family were Christian, and I believe they went to church regularly. I know for a fact that Laurie did, the mother. I don't know if it was a whole family thing, but Laurie was so involved in the church. She would go to every single ceremony? What are they called? Service? Anyway, she would always go. And whenever the church would put on events, she would help out, she would volunteer. She was a really lovely woman. She was really like community focused. She was really helpful. She was really generous. She was just one of those people that was always trying to give. And she was really quite well known in Craig for being such a lovely woman. Like, she was always involved in all the community stuff, so everyone knew her, and everyone loved like the energy that she brought to Craig. It feels weird calling a town Craig, doesn't it? Like, that's a person's name. The Waterman family lived quite a normal, happy life as far as my research could tell. Rachelle was a very normal kid. She did well in school, she did well in sports. To be fair, she was one of those people that did well in everything. Like, how can you be good at academic stuff, you get good grades, and you're good at sports, and she was good at performing arts, she could sing as well. She was just like the whole package. It's not fair for the rest of us. But as Rachelle grew into a teenager, she started to get a bit of a chip on her shoulder. She was quite argumentative, quite snappy, particularly with her mother, Laurie. They would just bicker all the time, which happens all the time when kids grow into teenagers. I know it happened with me and my mum, and my sister and my mum, and everyone else and their mum. You just start arguing because you're a teenager, you think you know it all. And your family are just trying to help you, they're just trying to raise you, and you don't see it like that. You see it like they're trying to control you. So Rachelle's getting a bit of a gob on her. At first it was like, it was fine. At first it was fine. Her parents saw it coming on very slowly. So like she started being a bit more moody and rebellious before she was like snappy and argumentative. So she would go quiet. She would spend a lot of time in a room by herself on her computer. She started dressing in all black, and like she was really getting into like gothic culture. I don't know how majorly she did, but she bought like gothic accessories, studs, spikes, stuff like that. She was going through like a bit of a rebellious like emo phase. I went through that one as well. But then Rachelle's family started getting a little bit actually concerned when they noticed that she was getting into Wicca, which is a pagan religion. Is it a religion? Witchcraft kind of stuff, which obviously was a huge problem for her mother because she was such a devout Christian. She'd raised Rachelle to be equally as devout as her to Christianity, and now her daughter was, you know, straying off path into a different religion, and her mum didn't like that. It caused a lot of arguments within the household, and it turned the general atmosphere of their family home into just quite an unpleasant one. There was that many regular arguments that there was just like an energy about the house that people just felt uncomfortable. If you've ever been in a situation like that where you've argued with the same person in short succession, like a roommate or your mum or something, and then you see them in the kitchen and it's just awkward. It was like that, but like every single day. And this family had never been like that before. And these arguments just got worse and worse and worse as Rachelle kept doing more and more things to upset her mum. So she got a few boyfriends, you know, here and there. And a lot of these boyfriends tended to be quite a bit older than her, which of course really concerned her mother. And she tried to express this to Rachelle that, you know, she thinks these boys' intentions are not very pure with her. They're quite predatory, and a relationship shouldn't be like that. She should be with someone her own age. But Rachelle didn't want to hear it. This caused so many arguments because Rachelle thought her mum just didn't want her to be happy. She was just being mean. In 2004, at the time of this case, Rachelle Waterman was 16 years old. And she was dating a 24-year-old man, a man that is nearly a decade older than her, 24-year-old Jason Arrant. And what's even more gross than just the age gap is the fact that he worked at her school. He was a cleaner, a janitor, whatever a janitor is, like a handyman, at her school. And of course, Rachelle, being a kid, didn't realise how predatory and weird Jason's attraction to her is. She thought that it was really cool because, like, he's an adult and they can do so many different things that she can't do with, like, boys her age. He can take her places and pay for things, and for her, this was really, really cool. She felt really grown up, really mature, which is often the case with these kind of relationships. Men, like these older predatory paedophile men, prey on the fact that it is exciting for, well, for a lot of young girls that are in this position, they do get excited by the thought of having an older man. Rachelle's parents tried to put a stop to this relationship so many times. Like, at first they were just trying to talk to their daughter and get through to her and make her realise that it wasn't good, but she just wasn't hearing any of it. So then her parents had to take more drastic measures and they started grounding her, not letting her out of the house. But even that didn't put a stop to it because Rachelle would just sneak out of the house in the middle of the night and just go and meet up with him somewhere. Rachelle would often go and hang out with Jason and his best friend, who was another 24-year-old man named Brian Radel. And Brian Radel actually also had a bit of a thing with Rachelle before Jason. We'll come back to that later on in the case, but I thought that was quite interesting to mention that both of these men are attracted to this child. And her parents hated this. Like, they hated the relationship. They hated the fact that she was hanging out with not one, but two predatory older men. They would hang out, just the three of them, alone in one of their houses, and her parents really hated that they didn't know what their daughter was up to. But to Rachelle, Jason and Brian were her best friends, and they were the best thing in her life, in her eyes, at that point in time. Because Rachelle did really, really struggle. She had mental health issues. I think she was depressed. And she hated living in Craig because it was so small. There was no one there that understood her. She felt like she was such an outsider that no one there got her. Rachelle made a written blog one day called My Crappy Life, and she just kind of used it as like an online diary where she would talk about all her secrets very publicly. As I'm sure you can gather from the name of the blog, My Crappy Life, the majority of the content was just her, like, venting about problems in her life. She would talk about how much she hated school, how much she hated her small town, how much she hated her parents, specifically her mother. And I'm not sure whether she spoke about this specifically in the blog or not, but I know that at this point in time, when she's about 16 years old, Rachelle starts confiding in her friends, mainly Jason and Brian, that her mother has become abusive. Supposedly it was verbal, mental, and physical. It took on all forms. This was very sudden 360 abuse that she was facing at the hands of her mother. Rachelle told her friends that her mum would always call her fat and she wouldn't feed her sometimes, so that she was like forcing her to lose weight. She said that her mother would like grab her by the wrist really, really hard and just drag her around the house. She would beat her regularly, like with her hands and also with weapons. Supposedly there was one incident where her mum shoved her down the stairs. But the thing is, I don't know if you've noticed as I've been saying all this, I've kept saying supposedly, and Rachelle said because a lot of her friends didn't believe what she was saying about her mother. I don't know exactly for what reason they didn't believe her, and I don't know if they ever called her out for this. Some of the reasons that her friends thought this was because of how nonchalantly Rachelle always told these stories. Like with the stairs incident, she just kind of mentioned it in passing, like, oh yeah, my mum tried to push me down the stairs, and then just like moved on with the conversation, and her friends were like, if your mum had actually tried to shove you down the stairs, could have killed you, could have broken your bones, why aren't we talking about it more? Like, I don't know, to her friends, it just never seemed genuine. Every single time she would say something new about her mum, it just never seemed genuine, and her friends would try and urge her to tell someone like a teacher or even police, And she just never seemed that bothered about telling anyone or about putting a stop to it, almost as if it wasn't actually happening. I don't know if her family knew about these accusations, like, at the time when she was 16 and she was telling all her friends, or if they found out in the aftermath of this case, because we talk about this quite a bit throughout the case. But when all of the people close to Laurie were asked, do you think this woman was abusive towards her daughter? Every single one of them said, I highly doubt it. I really don't think Laurie had it in her to physically abuse her daughter. She barely even had it in her to punish her daughter, like ground her. Laurie would do like the more day-to-day punishments, like if she did something wrong, she would shout at her. But if she did something like seriously wrong, Laurie would go to Doc, Rachelle's father, and say, can you sort this? Can you punish her? Because I can't deal with it. So everyone just found it really, really unlikely that Laurie would ever lay a hand on her daughter. Rachelle would show her friends bruises and be like, oh yeah, my mum did this one, my mum did that one. But her father, Doc, has since said that Rachelle always had bruises all over her because, one, she bruised easily, and two, she did a damn lot of sports. She did like volleyball, dodgeball, and a lot of the people, again, that were close to Laurie said that Laurie was actually worried sick about Rachelle. She really, really cared about that girl, and she really worried with the direction that her life was going because Rachelle was quite depressed. She was isolating herself from the world. She was going out with this predatory man that her mother really didn't like. She could tell that Jason, her child's boyfriend, wasn't going anywhere in life. He had weird intentions with her daughter. And Laurie would tell her friends all the time, I'm so worried about my daughter. I really want to help my daughter, but I don't know how to do it. So this woman seemed to care so much about this girl. But then we have Rachelle turning to her friends and saying that she's being horrifically abused and tortured at home. Like, it just doesn't even seem like it could be about the same person. And this is a really, really difficult situation for any of us to talk about. It does become a little bit more resolved towards the end of the case, but at this point in time, it's really one person's word against another person's, or like one group of people's words against another person's. You don't ever want to think that someone would lie about stuff like this, but when you have so much witness testimony on the other end saying, we really don't think that happened, then you do have to doubt certain things. Although I think it's important to still fully consider both sides, all sides. So that sets the scene for November 14th, 2004. It was a Sunday, and the only member of the Waterman family that was home that day was Laurie. Rachelle was playing an away game with her volleyball team, and Doc was away for the weekend. Don't know what he was doing, but he was away. They were both away. Laurie was home alone. But when Doc and Rachelle returned home on Sunday evening, more like Sunday afternoon, they noticed that Laurie wasn't home and her van wasn't in the driveway. So it seemed that she'd gone out somewhere. So Doc tried to call her, wondered where his wife was, and she was not picking up the phone. He texted her, called her multiple times. She hadn't left a note on the side in the kitchen or anything like that. Sometimes she did stuff like that if she was going out and she wanted to let people know. She hadn't let anyone know anything. Usually a situation like this wouldn't be that concerning because Laurie is a fully grown woman with a car. She can go anywhere in it if she wants, you know what I mean? People do that all the time. But Doc noticed a few weird things about the way that the house was left. For example, Laurie didn't drink. She did not drink alcohol at all. But in the kitchen, there was an empty bottle of wine on the side and an empty glass. So one glass as well. So Laurie had drunk a full bottle of wine alone. Her car wasn't there, which then made him worry that she drunk driven? She was drunk and driving. And this was also quite weird because Laurie was a very, very clean and tidy person. And not only had she left out a bottle of wine and a dirty glass, which she would never do, but there were other parts of the house as well that were quite, not messy, but just not Laurie. So like the bed upstairs wasn't made, which was weird. She made the bed as soon as she got out of it every single morning. She made a point of it. And there was a couple of things left out on the nightstand. Again, she would never do this kind of stuff. If she was just leaving for the day in her minivan, as she always did, then the house would be tidy before she left. She would make sure of it. But it wasn't. So Doc was a little bit worried, mainly about the wine thing and the fact that her car wasn't there. He was worried about his wife's safety, honestly. He didn't know what she'd done or what she was up to, but he needed to find her. And so Doc and Rachelle go and jump in the car, and they're driving around the neighborhood just looking for their mum or her car. So they're driving around and they're not seeing anything. The whole time they're still trying to call her phone and she's still not picking up. And eventually, as Sunday drew to a close, they knew that they weren't going to be able to find Laurie on their own, and at this point, they decided to report her as missing. Overnight, a police investigation was set up, so then as soon as the sun came out on Monday morning, they could get to work. Doc helped to join in the searches. Well, actually, I think he stayed at home and was just talking to police all day, giving them information. And Rachelle just went to school as normal that morning. It was a Monday, and they just kind of wanted to keep her in a bit of a routine. They were hopeful that Laurie would just turn up later that day, so no point taking Rachelle out of school when you don't think anything majors happened. Within hours of these searches being set up, police had found their first lead, and it was a blooming big lead. About 40 miles away from where the Watermans lived, there was a burning vehicle found just abandoned on a dirt track. The fire had very clearly intentionally been set. It was huge. The whole car was engulfed in flames. It was massive. And obviously with the location of the car, it very much seemed like it had been ditched there. This was all very intentional, and now police wanted to know why. When the fire was extinguished, police quickly concluded that this was Laurie Waterman's vehicle. Inside that burning car, sitting in the back seat, were some charred human remains that were practically just bones at this point. They had completely burnt to nothing. And again, it didn't take very long for them to identify those bones as Laurie Waterman. So now police had one hell of a case on their hands. This quiet Christian mother from a small town was found presumably murdered, because you don't end up in a situation like this if you die of natural causes. She'd been murdered, and the evidence intentionally set alight. Someone was trying to cover their tracks. Very quickly, crime scene investigators concluded that there was gasoline found all over the car, all around the car. So yeah, it was confirmed that this fire was started intentionally. They didn't know if Laurie was alive in the car when the fire was set or if she was already dead. Point being, someone didn't want police to recover any evidence relating to Laurie. So police had a search of the Waterman house, and they didn't really find much of anything. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. But there was one weird thing, well, a couple of little weird things that they found in the bedroom. There were some scraps of latex gloves that seemed like they'd been ripped and just, I don't know, just a couple of scraps of latex. Quite odd, very out of place. Why is that there in the bedroom? Especially when Laurie is such a clean woman. Why would she just leave scraps of some gloves on the floor? It didn't make sense, and they knew it was evidence. So, with very, very few leads to go off, police decided to try and establish some suspects in this case. Immediately, they looked to the people closest to Laurie, and the first man on their list was her husband, Doc. It always is. It's always the husband. It's always the love interest. Although he was very quickly ruled out. He had a rock-solid alibi, because he'd been away for the weekend, and everyone could confirm it. The rest of Laurie's family all had concrete alibis. Rachelle was at her volleyball match and all her team could vouch for her. Everyone's alibis were fully checked. So now police are eager to find out a bit more about their victim. They want to know who Laurie Waterman was, what kind of people she surrounded herself with, what kind of things she got up to. So they brought Doc and Rachelle down to the police station and interviewed them both separately and just kind of asked them loads of questions about Laurie. And one of the ones that stuck out to me in my research was when they were asking Rachelle about her relationship with her mother. And remember, Rachelle had told all her friends that she was borderline being tortured by her mother. It was mentally and physically abusive. But 16-year-old Rachelle sits there in the police station and tells them she has a good relationship with her mum. They talk quite a bit, they're quite close. She has a good relationship with her. She did acknowledge that they argued a little bit here and there, but she even acknowledged that every mother and their daughter argues. She was like, yeah, we argue here and there like every other mum and daughter. I'm confused. I am confused. That being said, she did lie about something else in this interview, so there's always the chance that she could have been lying about the abuse too. But she was majorly lying about her relationship with Jason. More so to protect Jason, because obviously he is the adult, he is the one in the wrong, and they know that he'll get into trouble over this relationship. He'll lose his job because remember, he worked at the school. So to get police off their backs, she lied to them and she said they weren't in a romantic relationship. They were just her friends. Brian and Jason were just her friends. But police knew. I mean, they'd already done a little bit of background research. They knew that she was in a relationship with Jason. Her parents weren't happy with it. Brian was Jason's best friend. Like, police know. Police knew the situation. They just wanted Rachelle to admit it. In fact, they'd already spoken with Doc about his daughter's relationship, and he told them that it was really putting a huge strain on the family. Laurie wasn't happy with her boyfriend at all. And as soon as police heard this, that Laurie, our murder victim, didn't approve of her daughter's older boyfriend, that made the boyfriend the new prime suspect, because he had a reason to want to get rid of Laurie so that he could be with her daughter. So now police start looking into Jason Arrant. So they start gathering a bit of intel on this man, and they very quickly learn that him and his best friend Brian Radel come as quite a package deal. They are constantly together. They'd been this way since they first met in college. They met at a party in college, I believe. And from that point on, they did everything together. Wherever Jason went, Brian would go, and vice versa. They were never seen without each other. They bonded over a lot of like nerdy stuff, and I don't even mean that to sound shady, but they used to play like Dungeons and Dragons and video games. They didn't go out to parties all that much. They didn't really like socializing with other people. They very much like to be isolated in their own little world with their computers. Now, one thing about Jason and Brian is that they were blood brothers, and if you don't know what that is, it's a bit grim. It's basically where people will make a cut, usually on their palm, but like you can do it anywhere, and then they shake hands, which then like mixes their blood, and it's supposed to be like a bonding like ritual. It is a ritual, innit, that? It's supposed to be a kind of like, not exactly a commitment to each other, because that makes it sound like a relationship, but it's kind of like a bond for life, kind of saying that you have each other's backs no matter what. That no matter what crazy shit they got each other into or they got themselves into, they would always be there for the other person. They said that whatever the other person wanted them to do, whatever they needed them to do, they would do it, no questions asked, and they didn't care what it was, they didn't care how heinous it was, they didn't care how stupid it was, they would do it. So that's the kind of friendship that these two men had. It was kind of like a us against the world kind of vibe. Like, it's everyone versus us, but we've got each other. And the two of them had a lot in common, as I'm sure you can tell, with like the nerdy stuff and the general dislike for social interaction. And then there was also underage girls. That's right, both of these fully grown 24-year-old men had had previous sexual relationships with children, with teenage girls, and specifically with Rachelle. Like I said, they'd both been seeing the same 16-year-old girl. So the way that Rachelle met Jason was actually through Brian. She met Brian first when he was at a party, and Jason wasn't, for some reason. This was like one of the only times that they ever did stuff without each other. Brian was at this party, and so was Rachelle. The two of them met and got talking. Brian was immediately attracted to this child, to this 15, 16-year-old girl, and he was flirting with her, and he said that he could immediately tell that she was into older men. So he took that as a green light to keep flirting with her. The two of them got on pretty well, supposedly, that night, and they continued a bit of a fling after the party. This kind of romantic relationship, sexual relationship continued after that night. But after a little while, it just wasn't really working out. Things just fizzle out sometimes. And Brian wasn't really interested in pursuing things with Rachelle anymore. So he thought that he would be a good friend and pass his girl on to his friend Jason. So he introduced his girl, Rachelle, and Jason, his best friend, and got them together. But things started to go a little bit weird when Rachelle and Jason like properly got together. So they were seeing each other for a little bit, and then when they became official, Jason got so jealous. So jealous. He was so possessive. He didn't let Rachelle talk to Brian, his best friend, his own best friend. So yeah, at the point of this case, when Laurie's body was actually found, Brian hadn't spoken to his friend Rachelle, someone that he considered a friend, in months, because they weren't allowed. And actually, Jason had lied to Brian and said, oh, the reason Rachelle's not talking to you is because she thinks you're weird. She doesn't like you. Not true. She was told by her boyfriend, you're not allowed to talk to him. So that's why she wasn't talking to him. She liked Brian. She wanted to be mates with Brian, but she wasn't allowed. And Jason was a very manipulative, calculated person. He used a lot of abuse tactics on Rachelle to like isolate her from everyone she loved, her friends, her family. He was causing fallouts left, right and centre, lying about her. But anyway, I'm really getting ahead of myself actually. I should not have gone on such a tangent there. Basically, that is where we're at this point in the case. Rachelle is in a relationship with Jason. She barely talks to Brian anymore. But all of this has happened, so now they're all in the police station. So the two men were arrested and they were taken to separate police stations. Actually, I think Jason was arrested first and his questioning came first. And he didn't waste any time in this questioning. He sat there and immediately told police that his best friend, Brian Radel, had murdered his girlfriend's mother. He literally just blurts it out that Brian is responsible for Laurie's death. They asked Jason if he would be willing to wear like a bug, like a wire, and go and have a conversation with Brian and try and get info out of him. And Jason agreed. So they mic him up and they send him off for a drive with Brian where the two of them are just chatting, and then they get onto the topic of Laurie's murder. And they have an incredibly incriminating conversation that implicates both of them in the murder. So now police aren't just suspicious of Brian, Jason's essentially just snitched on himself as well. So this conversation proves that both of those men had a part in Laurie Waterman's murder. Jason's actions at this point in the case really interest me. Like, why on earth would you agree to have a wired conversation if you knew that the conversation was going to incriminate you? Unless he wanted to get found out. But I actually really don't think he did. Unless he thought he would be able to like strategically steer the conversation that he and Brian were going to have and try and only incriminate Brian. I don't know, but it didn't work. Either way, police know that both men are involved now. Like I said, they arrested both of them. They've got them both in questioning. Brian also confesses that he is also responsible. So now all that's left for police to do is just ask him, well, tell us the story then. Tell us what happened from start to finish. Tell us. So Brian told police that it all started when Jason and Rachelle were an official couple, and obviously at this point, Brian's not allowed to talk to Rachelle. So he hasn't seen her in a while, hasn't heard from her. And then all of a sudden, Jason starts telling Brian that his girlfriend is getting really badly abused by her mother. And Brian is horrified by what he hears. He hears about Rachelle's mother starving her, beating her, throwing her down the stairs. This really hit deep for him because he was also abused by his parents as a child. And he even said that his abuse was nowhere near as bad as what this sounded like. So he remembered thinking, if I am so traumatized by what I've been through, if it was so bad for me, I can't imagine what it would be like for Rachelle. And for weeks after he found out about this, Brian just couldn't get it out of his head that Rachelle was going through this. He so badly wanted to help her. He wanted to save her. And he kept bringing it up to Jason saying, we should do something. We really need to do something about this. And as things got supposedly worse and worse with the abuse, the idea of killing Laurie Waterman comes up in conversation. I believe it was Jason that brought it up initially. And at first, Brian thought it was just like a figure of speech. It was just hyperbolic. Jason was just really angry and he was like, oh, we should just kill her. But after a few conversations, it quickly became a real plan for these two men. They decided that they were gonna murder Laurie Waterman in order to save Rachelle. But Jason had ulterior motives as well. So not only was it the abuse of his girlfriend, of course, they wanted to put a stop to that, but Jason knew that with Laurie Waterman out of the way, he'd be able to date her daughter again. Well, I don't know if it'd be that easy because Doc might have had an issue with him, but I mean, it's a lot easier to disobey one parent than it is two parents. So there was other reasons that Jason wanted Laurie gone. And I think that Jason is quite the evil mastermind. He's now got his best friend all riled up and willing to murder for him. Like, he doesn't have to get his hands dirty. His best friend is literally offering to do it, suggesting it daily that they need to do it. And so Jason's like, all right, okay. In fact, he starts encouraging Brian because Brian's kind of taking a bit longer than Jason wanted. And so he starts saying things to him like, we're gonna have to do something about Laurie soon, otherwise it'll be too late. She'll hurt Rachelle. She might even kill Rachelle. It was like he was making out that they needed to kill Laurie before she killed Rachelle. That's how bad Jason was insinuating that this abuse was. But remember, at this point in the case, Rachelle and Brian are not in contact. They're not allowed to talk to each other. So the only stuff that Brian has heard about Rachelle's abuse has been through Jason. Because the abuse seemed to only start when Rachelle and Jason kind of got together. Brian had been dating Rachelle before this and he'd never heard about any abuse. So now everything that he's hearing is coming through Jason. So, I mean, Jason could be saying whatever he wanted. And the abuse part of this case is already doubted, as I've said. Everyone in Laurie's life really doesn't believe that she was ever abusive to her daughter. But people doubt it even more when you find out that Jason is the one pushing this narrative to Brian. He stands to gain from that. If Brian thinks Laurie is a monster, he will want to kill her, so then Jason won't have to do anything. So he's making this woman sound awful to Brian. He made out like it was like urgent life or death. They needed to save Rachelle now or she was gonna die. So Brian felt he had to act fast. He never once doubted his friend through all of this, by the way, because they were blood brothers. They were so loyal to each other. They had never ever lied to each other before. So he had no reason to suspect that they would start now. Brian did ask for proof of the abuse from Jason at one point, because he was saying, look, if I am willing to literally murder for this, I kind of need to see some proof that it's real before I go ahead and do the worst thing imaginable. So Jason told Brian, well, I saw it with my own two eyes one time. He and Rachelle were supposedly on Skype and she had the webcam on, and then her mum came into the room and just started beating her. She had a baseball bat and apparently she was hitting her knees with it. And that was enough proof for Brian that Jason supposedly said he'd seen it with his own eyes. But no one else ever saw this with their own eyes, ever. So now that Brian had this proof, he was willing to murder to save Rachelle Waterman. And so they started putting a bit of a plan in place. They didn't know how they were going to do it for a while, and they bounced between quite a few different methods that they could use. They talked about getting a gun and just trying to like shoot her in the street one time. They talked about potentially filling a tub with cement and putting her in it and like throwing it in the ocean, I don't know, so that it sinks, I don't know. They talked about potentially tampering with her car, cutting the brakes so that she would crash, or even like rigging it with explosives so when she opened the door it'd just like blow up and set on fire, kill her. So yeah, there were all these different ideas floating around, and they actually attempted one or two of them before the actual successful murder. About a month or so before the murder, Brian had tried to kill Laurie with a gun. He'd taken a gun, followed her to school when she dropped Rachelle off at school, and he was waiting for her to come out of the school when he realised he'd forgotten a part of the gun. So then he couldn't use it. And so that plan was foiled. So then he tried again a second time. There was another weekend where both Rachelle and Doc were going to be away for the weekend. Laurie was going to be home alone. So Brian's plan was that he was going to break into the house in the middle of the night with a knife and try and stab Laurie to death in her own home. And he got as far as the house. He got to the house in the middle of the night with the knife, and then he realised that Laurie had guests over. And so he couldn't really do it now. He did actually debate it for a second, and he thought, well, I could just kill them both. But he didn't want to have to kill an innocent person along with Laurie. He didn't want to just kill for the sake of killing. He wanted to kill to get rid of an abuser. So apparently Jason told Rachelle about these 2 failed murder attempts. And supposedly she told him that she'd changed her mind. She said, oh, please don't try again. I've decided I love my mum. I want her to live. I don't want you to kill her anymore. She told them, no, don't. But Jason never passed on the message to Brian. And of course, Rachelle couldn't tell Brian herself. So the murder plan was still due to go ahead. And that was when they finally planned the murder that was successful, the third attempt. It was kind of similar to the previous attempt where Brian went to the house in the middle of the night and he was going to break in and ambush Laurie. So that night, Jason drove Brian to Rachelle's house, dropped him off, and Jason was going to go and park like a few streets away just so it wasn't that suspicious. He drops Brian off at the house and Brian breaks in through the cat flap which is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. You're a fully grown man going through a cat flap. He gets in the house and he immediately makes his way to Laurie's bedroom, which is all the way on the top floor. This was a 3-floor house. He goes all the way up to the top and he's about to open the door when he hears commotion inside. And so he ran round the corner of the hallway, like hid behind a wall. And basically what I think had happened, I think he'd made his way to the bedroom. Laurie inside the bedroom had heard the noise on the landing. And so she came and opened the door, looked out into the landing to see where the noise had come from, if anyone was there. She didn't see anything. And so she just closed the door and went back in her bedroom. Genuinely sounds like a scene out of a movie. Like, that's really suspenseful. And at that point, Brian thought she'd seen him. And so he just kind of stood there frozen for over an hour, nearly an hour and a half. He just stood there frozen, silent, hiding behind a wall, just in case she'd called the police. And he was waiting to hear sirens, and he didn't want to risk disturbing the situation even more. So he just stood there like a lemon for an hour and a half. And then when he was confident that no one was coming for him, Brian put his plan back into action. He headed back over to Laurie's bedroom and this time just went straight in. Laurie was asleep in bed at this point. He walked over to her, woke her up, tried to gag her, I think, but she was laying face down. I don't really know the details of this. He managed to wake her up, gag her, and he basically said to her, look, if you do everything I tell you, if you follow orders perfectly, I won't hurt you. Apparently, Laurie was crying for quite a while, and so he just waited until she stopped crying, and then she was ready to follow orders. The first order was to come downstairs with him and drink a full bottle of wine. To herself, not with him, to herself. He went and got the bottle, got a glass, poured it for her, ungagged her, and made her drink this whole bottle of wine. And remember, Laurie doesn't drink. So a whole bottle of wine to a person that doesn't drink alcohol at all, that's gonna F them up. So what I think the plan was, Jason and Brian had discussed how they were going to kill Laurie and how they were going to try and cover it up. And what I think the plan was, they were going to try and make it look like a drunk driving accident. Like she'd gotten into a car crash, she'd gotten in the car after drinking this full bottle of wine, and she'd had a crash and died. The way that they were planning to do this was to get her really drunk so that her intoxication levels were consistent, and then they were going to break her neck and then put her in the driver's seat of her car and make it look like, you know, she'd had a car crash. So, at this point, Laurie had drunk the whole bottle of wine. She was really, really drunk. And so Brian orders her to get in the back of her own car. And I think he actually had to help her a little bit because she was really inebriated. So she's in the back of her own minivan. Brian is driving it and they drive 40 miles out to this like isolated dirt track where the car was later found. Once they arrived, Jason was already there. He'd been waiting for a couple of hours at this point. He was actually a bit annoyed with how long Brian had taken to kidnap his girlfriend's mother. So like I said, the plan was to try and break Laurie's neck and make it look like a car crash injury. So they ordered her to get down on her knees, and Brian is just ragging this woman's head left, right, and centre. He's jerking her all over the place and he just can't break her neck. He's just not getting the movements right or anything. I think he thought it would be a lot easier to break someone's neck than it actually is. Like, you have to get it at the perfect angle. I mean, I wouldn't know. I've never broken a neck. But he just wasn't doing it. He tried so many times. He even changed his positioning. Like, he changed his stance and where his hands were on her head, and he tried a different technique. Just wasn't working. They couldn't break her neck. Well, actually, they gave it another shot on top of that. They tried a third different way where they went and got a massive flashlight out of one of their cars, you know, their massive, heavy industrial ones. And they just started hitting her neck with it. I think they were trying to like crush the bones in her neck with this flashlight. And again, that wasn't working either. This whole time, by the way, Laurie is trying to say something to her attackers, but she is so inebriated that her words are slurred. Over and over, she kept saying, "Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?" And Brian said he would respond to her and be like, "What is it? Like, what do you want to ask?" And she'd just go quiet, and then a few seconds later, she'd say it again, "Can I ask a question?" It was as if she wasn't hearing Brian acknowledging and like, you know, inviting her to ask the question. That's all she said. "Can I ask a question?" a couple of times, and she never actually asked the question, so they don't know what she was going to ask. And it was about this point in the attack where Jason got down on the ground by Laurie because she was still on her knees. Brian was still trying to break her neck. Jason got down next to her and said something to the effect of, "You'll never fucking hurt Rachelle ever again." So now the men have their victim here and they're realizing that the initial plan of trying to break her neck and make it look like a car crash was not going to work. They just couldn't break this woman's neck. They didn't know how. And by now they were a little bit panicked. I think the fact that their plan just wasn't going to plan was stressing them out a bit. And so they did the quickest thing that they could think to do. Brian put his hand over her mouth and over her nose and smothered Laurie to death. They then threw her body in the back of her own car, doused the whole thing in gasoline, and set it on fire. Brian actually took his own clothes off as well and threw them in the fire so that he could get rid of any evidence. And then the two of them drove back home in Jason's car. So that is the story that Jason and Brian told the police about how and why they murdered Laurie Waterman. So it was very clear that this was a premeditated and well-planned murder. And police wanted to know how much Rachelle was involved in the murder of her own mother. And Rachelle told police that she knew nothing about the plan. Those two men had plotted and planned and carried it all out, all by themselves. She had no idea that it was going to happen, how they were going to do it. As far as she was aware, since she told them, "No, don't kill my mum, I've changed my mind," that was the end of it. She thought that was the end of it anyway. Rachelle says that she had no idea about this plan and everything, but I'm gonna call her bluff for a second. The text records between Rachelle and her boyfriend Jason are quite suspicious at points. She told him that she was going out of town that weekend, her dad would also be out of town, and so her mother would be home alone. She texted her boyfriend that, which is just odd, isn't it? Like, I wouldn't text my boyfriend being like, "My mum's home alone this weekend." It was odd. It was clear why she was texting him that, so that this plan could be put into place. Another thing that I think, that a lot of people think is a little bit weird about Rachelle was how she acted the day after her mother went missing. So Laurie went missing on the Sunday, Rachelle went to school as normal on the Monday. That's not the weird part. The way that she was acting at school is the weird part. Of course, everyone's giving her loads of attention and comforting her and asking if she's all right and asking what she thinks happened. And Rachelle told her friends at one point that she thinks her mum had probably died in a drunk car accident. Pause for a second. What a rogue thing to say. Your mum is freshly missing. She's not even been missing for 24 hours yet, and your brain is immediately going, "Oh, she's dead." And not even just she's dead. She was so specific with it. "Oh, my mum's probably dead in a drunk car crash." Bear in mind, Laurie didn't drink. Why would Rachelle specifically think that her mum was dead in a drunk car crash if she'd never really seen her mum drink before? For a girl that didn't know the plan that Jason and Brian were putting together, that they were going to make it look like a drunk car crash, for a girl that didn't know about that plan, she certainly seems like she knew about that plan. And there's also the fact that she just said it so nonchalantly as well, as she always had with like talking about her mother's abuse. She was just like, "Oh, well, yeah, she's probably dead in a drunk car crash." What? I think she knew that they were going to try and stage it as a car crash. I think she'd been briefed by Jason, and so she was kind of sowing seeds there. And there's another weird thing about Rachelle, like, she acts really weird at points in this. So when her mother's body was discovered, of course, everyone around Laurie was so devastated. But Rachelle didn't seem all that affected. She seemed really quite unemotional whenever she was talking about it. So remember I said she had that blog, My Crappy Life? Well, she wrote a blog post about her mother's murder, and it's so matter of fact that it's eerie. Like, there's no emotion, there's no love, there's no grief or sadness behind it at all. I actually have a quote. This is the exact quote as well. "Just to let everyone know, my mother was murdered. I won't have computer access until the weekend because police took my computer to look through the hard drive." It's just so cold, isn't it? She's literally just updating people being like, "Sorry guys, be right back. My mum got murdered and police need my laptop for my mum's murder investigation. BRB. So all three of them, Jason, Brian and Rachelle, are being held in police custody, and they're all charged and gonna face trial for for different things. And it was now, at this point in the case, so obviously police have been investigating, they've been digging, they've collected all of this like objective information of what was really going on in this situation. And now Brian is finding out the truth of the situation, that the abuse that Rachelle was facing was either entirely fabricated or extremely exaggerated. It was nowhere near as bad as what she was saying it was, if it even existed at all. People that were close to Laurie say that she was never abusive, even a little bit. But of course, none of us can say for sure because none of us were there. That being said, Brian was now finding out that Jason had lied about how bad the abuse was against Rachelle, and Brian felt used. In fact, he felt a lot of different emotions. He was so deeply hurt and angry that they would lie about something like this and get him so emotional and like play on the fact that he was an abused child as well, and he would want to protect an abused child when really all they wanted was to get Rachelle's mother out of the way. But they didn't want to do it themselves. They wanted, essentially, a hitman. So Jason had hyped up Brian to really hate Rachelle's mother, telling him how abusive she was and all this, when a lot of people really don't think she was. And now Brian found that out, and he felt remorseful. Really remorseful. He felt like he had killed an innocent person for no reason. He now felt like he had murdered an innocent person for no reason. Because he had been led to believe that he was getting rid of an awful, abusive person. He was eradicating the world of this monster. And now he was finding out that she was just a mum. She was just a mum arguing with her daughter here and there that didn't approve of her daughter's boyfriend. That was about the extent of it, as far as we can tell. He's since said that he wishes he could go back and not do it because he thinks that she doesn't deserve to die. He did originally when he thought she was an awful, awful person. He thought that as an abuser, she deserved to die. But now that he found out she wasn't, he felt really, really bad. So let's talk about the charges and sentences of all of them. Both Brian Radel and Jason Arrant pled guilty to first-degree murder. Brian got 99 years in prison and Jason got 50. Brian's minimum term is 33 years and Jason's minimum term was 16 years. And then after that, they can apply for parole. And I think 16 years is way too short. That scares me. Rachelle Waterman was found guilty of criminally negligent homicide, which is an interesting phrase that I don't think I've actually heard before. And for that, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. So of course, she is out of prison now and living her life. She's just back to normal life. And she still posts on her blog, My Crappy Life. I personally haven't gone and sought it out and read it because I'm not interested. But if you are, maybe do it. I know she's posted on there this year. I don't know how recent, but she's been active in 2022. But yeah, that is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring. If you go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is also down below in the description. There'll be an exclusive deal waiting there for you, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below. That would really help me out. If you want to watch another one of my videos, there you go. Or if you want to subscribe to my channel so that you get updates whenever I upload, there you go. There's a little picture of my face. You can click that. But yeah. Oh God, that was loud. Bye.